On this episode, two medical mysteries that defied the experts.
His nose appeared to be shrinking and getting almost more beak-like.
We started to realise that the doctors had not seen something like this before.
Sharon and John Crowther are on a desperate worldwide search for a doctor who can tell them why their son Harry is transforming before their eyes.
They knew there was something wrong with me, but they just didn't know what.
Then, newlywed Sadie Jones thinks she has it all, until she's suddenly faced with a series of terrifying symptoms, which doctors believe are all in her head.
The pain got so bad that I thought I was having a heart attack.
Her hair was just starting to fall out. I was constantly worried whether she was okay.
It felt like I was just screaming at the top of my lungs and nobody was listening to me.
Sharon Clough and John Crowther grew up near each other in West Yorkshire, England. But it wasn't until they were teenagers that they met and fell for each other.
I've known John since I was 15 years of age. I always knew I wanted to be with John. The minute I set eyes on him, yeah.
First impression of Sharon, she was young, loud, different, and that kind of got my eye.
But John had another girlfriend, so I had to fight that obstacle, and I did, and I won, and I got my man.
5 years later, in 1990, the young couple married and set about building a life together.
I always wanted children, straight away.
I always wanted to be a father, yes. First child was Emma. She was born in September 1993. And we knew after we had Emma, we just needed more and more. Second child is Jack. He was born in January 1996.
And just 3 years later, the Crowthers welcomed their third child into the world.
Harry was born in 1999 in February. To me, he just looked absolutely perfect.
For me, being a dad, it was great. I'd come home of an evening, put them to bed, and it was great.
The Crowthers couldn't be happier as they watch Harry meet all of his milestones right on time. Nothing could have prepared them for what happens one spring morning soon after his first birthday.
It was just a normal day. I was bathing Harry, lifted up his arms and noticed under one of his arms that he appeared to have what I thought was little tiny freckles. But they were quite spread out under his armpit, and they were like a pale brown colour, and I'd not seen anything like it before. Emma and Jack didn't have anything like that, so we knew we had to get him to the doctor. The dermatologist had a special lamp that he would use, which was like a UV light. He started off under his armpits and he slowly scanned the light, and then he concentrated mainly on Harry's stomach area, and as he shined the light over, there was a big patch on his stomach that you couldn't see to the naked eye. About half the size of an apple. Could only see it under the lamp.
We were getting quite worried now, and Jack and Emma were very inquisitive about what was going on with Harry, but we just said he's special and we just need to sort him out.
We were referred to the geneticist, and we went to see him, and that's when he mentioned a disorder called neurofibromatosis type 1.
Type 1 neurofibromatosis is a genetic condition that usually sets in during childhood. As it progresses, life-threatening tumors may develop throughout the body.
The doctor wanted to do a blood test to check to determine whether it was neurofibromatosis type 1. And at that point, I really did panic. The first thing you do is you go home and you look it up on the internet, which isn't a good thing to do because the internet always shows the worst-case scenario. So obviously you can imagine we just envisaged Harry being covered in these little tumours.
The waiting was quite traumatic. We pretty much feared the worst.
It was a couple of weeks, but as you can imagine as parents, it felt forever. The geneticist called us back into his office. The test came back negative. So, as you can imagine, it was a big relief.
Over the next 2 years, the inexplicable spots begin to spread to new areas, and Harry undergoes test after test to no avail.
And we really didn't know what to do at that point.
We just needed somebody just to clarify what it was that he had.
While the odd markings are extremely worrisome, the Crowthers remain hopeful about their son's health, especially when it's clear he's a bright little boy.
He could hold a good conversation even as a 3-year-old. He was very bright.
And as far as mentally, he was brilliant. He's the funny little chap. He's always been, you know, what we call bright as a button.
And in the fall of 2003, Harry begins preschool. It's an exciting time for the family, as Harry seems to revel in the experience. But just when they least expect it, a shocking new symptom begins to emerge.
He was getting ready to go to preschool, so we know he was fighting to get dressed, and that's when I noticed it. The skin round his tummy seemed tight and shiny, and it just seemed as if somebody had almost grabbed him from behind and pulled his tummy really tight, as if he'd been fastened by a clip at the back of him.
Horrified by the transformation, the Crowthers set up yet another appointment with the geneticist. And over the next week, Harry endures a series of tests.
They were just testing to see if they could find a chromosome defect. He said that he still didn't have a clue as to what he thought it was, but that he was going to try his hardest to find out what it was that Harry had.
There was no abnormalities, but that just thickened the plot, so to speak.
I just knew something was terribly wrong. I would have given my right leg to find out what was wrong with Harry.
The geneticist started to speak to different colleagues across the UK. No one knew what was going to happen. We didn't, the doctors didn't. That just frustrated us.
It's a difficult time for the family as they wait helplessly for some explanation. Making matters worse, over the next year, Harry's body begins to change in even more bizarre ways.
The way his bones were forming, you could see something wasn't quite right. Harry had very small, almost non-existent collarbones.
And I remember thinking, whoever put Harry together, it kind of looked like they stuck his arms on in the wrong place and his chest didn't look quite right.
My name's Harry and I live in England, Murfield. Sometimes people that are rude and just stare at me. I don't like going out really, and that's why.
People could tell Harry was different. They would get their friend and pull their friend over to have a look. That's not nice for a little boy to see. We knew that something wasn't quite right. We wanted to find out what it was. We weren't prepared to just sit back and think that Harry just had to live like this. John and I needed to find answers. I needed to know what was wrong with Harry.
We started to realise that the doctors, even though they knew their field, had not seen something like this before.
It's a long and tedious process for the Crowthers, and over the next year, things begin to take a toll on the family.
Sharon was really tough. She was putting on a happy face for kids.
I think I was more worried about how Sharon was feeling. She seemed worried and distant, and there were times when she wouldn't really want to talk about it.
I think they were really worried about me. They knew there was something wrong with me, but they just didn't know what, and they wanted to find out what.
Over the past 6 years, Harry Crowther's body has mysteriously transformed, and no doctor can tell his parents why. And while Sharon and John Crowther have not given up hope that they will eventually track down an answer, they're forced to face a difficult reality. The children at school are beginning to notice just how different Harry is.
He started to get picked on. Harry now was realising he was different to most children now.
They wanted to know what was wrong with him. He just tried to ignore them.
Everybody has a different appearance. I'm just like them, really.
Harry's a tough cookie, and even when he's down, he just picks himself up.
We love Harry for who Harry is.
While Sharon and John do the best they can to help Harry feel normal, they can't help but notice that his body is continually transforming.
When we first noticed changes in his face, His nose appeared to be shrinking and getting almost more beak-like. He's always had beautiful blue eyes, but they seem to be getting more protruding. And as his teeth were growing, his teeth seemed to be all trying to squeeze into a small mouth, so he had a lot of overcrowding in his mouth.
And just before Harry's 7th birthday, it's all too clear that the mysterious disease he's living with has taken on a life of its own. Terrified by the rapid pace with which it's attacking his body, the Crowthers demand an explanation.
The geneticist did think it was something called MAD, which is mandibular-acral dysplasia.
Mandibulo-acral dysplasia, or MAD, is a genetic disorder characterized by a receding chin, very little body fat, and small collarbones and fingers. MAD is irreversible, and many patients go on to experience heart problems and a shortened lifespan.
When we researched mandibular-acral dysplasia, we came across a website of a little boy who really looked like Harry, but the geneticist wanted to do a blood test to check.
The next week is almost unbearable for the family as they wait for the findings to come in.
Harry tested negative for the mandibular-acral dysplasia. And when the tests come back to say it wasn't that was a big shock.
Back at square one, the Crowthers insist that the geneticist help them track down someone who can shed some light on their son's baffling condition. A few weeks later, he has the name of a doctor who may be able to help Harry.
The geneticist said that he knew of a doctor in Dallas, Texas, that would be able to finally tell us what was wrong with Harry.
Travelling so far wasn't a problem. We got to a stage now where we had to find some answers, and then we'd go to the moon to find those answers. It didn't matter.
I got an email from a geneticist in the United Kingdom asking my opinion about Harry's condition. We had seen other children with similar problems that Harry was presenting with, but Harry's case was very perplexing, and that's why I encouraged them to consider visiting us in Dallas so that I could have a chance to personally evaluate him here. When we evaluated him, he had freckles on his body, he had shiny, tight skin on his hands, and he had some sharp features on his face, a little bit pointed nose and small mandible.
Dr. Garg was really nice and he came to have a look at me, ran some tests. Some of the tests were really weird, where they had to put me in a tank and they slowly filled it up with water.
We conducted underwater weighing to find out how much body fat he has.
Harry had a DEXA scan that measures bone density.
Finally, after reviewing all of the test results, Dr. Garg is confident he knows the name of the disease Harry is living with.
I think both John and I had a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I knew that we had to be brave.
The clinical features that I saw in Harry and the results of the genetic testing confirmed that we were dealing with atypical progeria syndrome.
Atypical Progeria Syndrome is a genetic disorder that presents with premature aging. In healthy individuals, cells are constantly renewed to replace dying cells, helping to maintain healthy tissue throughout the body. But in patients like Harry, a genetic mutation interrupts this process, leading to accelerated aging.
Atypical progeria syndrome is extremely rare, with only 30 patients reported so far in the world literature.
Harry's disorder is similar to another genetic disease, progeria. But atypical progeria patients have some symptoms of progeria and not others. And no two patients with atypical progeria are alike.
Everyone will have different manifestations or clinical features. Why, we don't know.
However, it's now all too clear that each of the symptoms Harry has experienced so far is a direct result of the genetic mutation. He is aging 5 times faster than normal.
To finally have a diagnosis for Harry was a big relief, but equally it was frustrating that he could only say what he thought might happen, because each patient obviously goes through it differently. You know, your worst fear is you don't know how long your child's got to live.
While the average lifespan for a child with classical progeria is 13, experts are more optimistic about Harry's future.
The fact it's atypical means his life expectancy is much, much longer, which is really, really good, and we're very happy about that.
So we just have to remain positive. Ultimately, it doesn't affect their mental state. As they get older, their body gets older, they don't deteriorate mentally, which is an absolute blessing.
With Dr. Garg's help, the Crowthers begin to understand how the debilitating disease will eventually slow Harry down.
There is no cure for atypical progeria syndrome at this time.
He knew that Harry would probably suffer with problems with his joints, problems with his heart.
And we can take a preemptive approach there to handle those manifestations even before they appear.
Grateful to finally have a diagnosis in hand, Sharon and John can't help but wonder why they had to travel almost 5,000 miles to find a doctor who recognized the disease.
I think we had to travel so far because it is so rare that not many doctors here in the UK have ever seen a case of progeria in their lifetime.
Today, despite the changes his body continues to undergo, Harry is a bright and happy 11-year-old boy.
It makes me age 5 times faster, so I'm 11 now, so my bones will be 55 years old.
Harry said to me, "Grandma, guess what? You and I are the same age inside." I said, "Oh, no, not really. I'm a bit older than you." But it was Harry's way of understanding what Atypical Progeria Syndrome means to him. He thinks it's amazing.
To not have a precedent of what to expect with Harry has been tough. Since being diagnosed, he's developed arthritis in his knees, his elbows, his fingers, his toes. He sees an occupational therapist, a physiotherapist. All the doctors are monitoring Harry closely.
And so I just know how to look after myself now. I have to be careful of contact sport like football, rugby, because I get hurt really easily.
Harry's where he should be at school. He's achieving all his milestones academically. He's got so many friends from all ages and he never complains. He just is an upbeat little boy.
Everybody loves him. He's cheeky, he's fun, he's really a good character to be around. Very funny chap.
I think Atypical Progeria Syndrome that Harry has is what makes Harry, Harry. And I wouldn't swap him.
The key message for us was we've got to keep trying to piece the puzzle together. And if you ask the right questions enough times, you'll get the right answer.
There is somebody out there to help. Just ask, keep asking, keep asking, keep asking.
It took us 6 years of trying and trying, and we had an answer.
Harry's my hero. He's been an absolute star through all this. And he's an inspiration. And I love him.
I feel happy most of the time. I can't stop smiling.
Next, Sadie Mills is forced to face a series of bizarre symptoms that turn her life upside down. In 2004, 19-year-old Sadie Mills was a happy, healthy nursing student living in the small town of Weatherford, Texas, and working toward the dream she'd had since she was a child.
I decided I wanted to be a nurse when I was probably about 6 years old. Every time somebody would get a scrape or something like that, I would put a Band-Aid on it.
And another dream seems to be coming true when Les Jones, a paramedic, enters her life.
I met Les as a student in college. As part of one of my classes, we had to ride on the ambulance with the paramedics and assist patients. I rode out on his truck, on his ambulance.
I started talking and we've been together ever since, pretty much. We were constantly going and doing things, and we would go to museums and we would go to Fort Worth shopping and walking through downtown. We stayed really busy all the time.
We dated for 2 years, and One day he took me to my favorite restaurant in Fort Worth, and he asked me to marry him, pulled the ring out of his pocket. We were married December the 16th, and it was a very small wedding at my mother's house. It's really sweet. Everything was going as good as I could expect it. I was in college, and Les had a good job. We had just got a new house.
Not long after getting married, Sadie is awakened one night by an intense and unfamiliar pain.
It was probably about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I woke up suddenly. It felt like somebody stabbed me in the chest. I did not know what just happened to me. I was freaked out.
24-year-old Sadie Jones has always been a picture of perfect health. Little does she know that her world is about to begin spiraling out of control when she's struck by a frightening sensation in the middle of the night.
I woke up suddenly like somebody stabbed me in the chest is the way it felt. It felt like my throat was on fire and my mouth was on fire. Never had anything like that before. I reached over and grabbed the bottle of water and just drank as much as I could get down, and it just immediately relieved the symptoms. I thought maybe it was heartburn. I was able to fall asleep probably within about 5 or 10 minutes of drinking the water. I felt completely normal when I woke up the next morning.
But over the next few weeks, the heartburn-like pain returns and keeps coming back.
It just came without warning, the heartburn. It didn't matter what I was doing, where I was, it just would hit me. I just figured that because I had gained some weight right before Les and I had gotten married, and I thought that going from, such an extreme, that maybe that's what was causing it. And I started taking at least a half a bottle of antacids a day. Nothing was helping.
I think maybe initially she thought that it was normal and other people felt it too, and she was just overreacting to it.
Then, one day in early spring, while she's grocery shopping, a terrifying incident sends Sadie reeling.
I remember going into the grocery store to get groceries, and Les was with me, and all of a sudden I could feel the heartburn coming on, and I knew that something was wrong. The pain got so bad that I was just standing in between aisles, just kind of gripping the shopping cart, just shaking. It scared me to death.
She got very pale. Her forehead got really sweaty. It was obvious that there was something going on.
Les didn't know what was wrong with me. I couldn't even talk. I thought I was having a heart attack.
Alarmed, Les rushes his wife to the ER.
It felt like a lot of pressure in my chest, a lot of burning and tingling.
The on-call physician immediately performs a series of tests, but there's no sign of any cardiac disorder. However, the doctor does have a hunch about what's causing the pain.
He thought that maybe I could have an ulcer. I had to have a blood test. It took about 3 weeks to get the results back. The test came back negative. I didn't know what to make of it.
Over the next 2 weeks, the heartburn-like attacks only seem to intensify. Then, one Sunday night, Sadie is jarred awake by a bizarre new symptom.
I felt like I was drowning. It felt like somebody poured a bucket of water on my face while I was asleep, and I was choking, I was coughing. I had realized that I had thrown up in my sleep, so I ran into the bathroom to clean myself up. And I was afraid that if I went to sleep that I would do it again. I was very embarrassed. Like I wet the bed, but I didn't. That's kind of how it felt. It was just as mortifying.
Frightened and bewildered, Sadie makes an appointment to see her doctor the very next day.
The doctor thought maybe it was because I drank so much water right before I went to bed. He told me to try to keep from drinking anything after about 7 o'clock at night, just to kind of ensure that I'd have nothing to come up in my throat.
I'm a paramedic, I'm not a doctor. I'm not gonna question what the doctor says, right off the bat.
But just a few nights later, Sadie wakes up again to find herself drenched in water. And when she makes an appointment with her doctor, he can find nothing wrong and assures her that it's just stress.
The doctor just kind of didn't seem to really take us very seriously. Basically, it seemed like the doctor was telling us there's got to be something that's causing it. It's got to be something that you're doing that is making you feel this way.
It felt like I was just screaming at the top of my lungs and nobody was listening to me at all. Nobody could even hear me.
Over the last 4 months, nursing student Sadie Jones has been suffering from excruciating heartburn, and she's just started vomiting water in her sleep. Her doctor is convinced that stress is triggering everything, but Sadie's husband, Les, isn't so sure.
I told Sadie whenever I saw it that I don't know, what's going on. I don't know what this is, but that's not normal.
Basically, I wasn't sleeping more than just a few hours a night at that point because of all the heartburn and the throwing up. And I just started feeling very tired and lethargic when I was, going to class.
As her medical problems started getting more frequent and more severe, it got to the point to where I was seeing her with a book studying less often.
Usually I'm at a 4.0, and I had started making B's and C's on tests because I was just too tired to study.
She was exhausted, she was depressed. Watching my newlywed wife go through all of this and knowing that there's nothing that I can do to fix it, seeing that happening was horrible.
During the day, Sadie drags herself from one class to the next. But in the evenings, she begins to notice a bizarre new development.
I would be eating something, and I felt like I would get too full, and water or food would come up into my mouth. It wasn't digested at all. I knew my food wasn't going into my stomach, and that scared me.
She didn't feel good because she didn't know what was going on. She was honestly frightened, and you could tell that she wanted it fixed.
I just was very, very tired of it. I didn't know what to do anymore. I went to the doctor and told him I'm throwing up everything I eat. I am hungry and I can't eat anything. He thought that I was just getting really stressed at school or something. He said that it was all in my head. I kind of started just suspecting maybe that is what it is. Maybe I am crazy, I don't know.
But just when they think things can't get any worse, Sadie develops another humiliating problem.
One day, about 6 months into having the heartburn, I was in class and all of a sudden I got this really loud hiccup. And these were just, they wouldn't quit, and they were extremely loud and embarrassing. I couldn't get them to stop. I was just sitting there thinking, what am I gonna do? I need to leave class. And it lasted all day long. It was very weird. I'd never had anything like that happen to me before.
And it's not long before the embarrassing episodes are happening several times a day.
Nothing really seemed to relieve them at all. It hit me in the middle of a test, and I would have to get up and walk out, which you're not allowed to do.
She would shudder whenever she would hiccup because it was so violent.
I looked it up on the internet, and it said that people in stressful situations can get really bad hiccups. I just figured that's what was causing it.
As she started having more problems, she got to the point where she didn't want to go out. We spent a lot more time at home than what we normally did.
I was very embarrassed by the whole thing, and just being married, you want to go and have fun and be together. I was emotionally drained. I felt like I wasn't even me anymore.
After living with the strange symptoms for more than 6 months, Sadie is hoping that a drive to the country will cheer her up. But nothing could have prepared her for what's about to happen.
We were driving, and then I kind of felt uncomfortable, like I had drank the fizzy stuff off of a soft drink or something, and it was kind of just in the back of my throat.
Sadie had a feeling like she needed to burp, but she couldn't. So I pull over on the side of the road, and she opens the door. It was like she was vomiting, and on the ground beside her door was a big pile of bubbles, like the head on a beer.
Like dish soap foam. It was really thick foam.
She looked like she was scared to death. We had no clue what was going on.
Over the last 8 months, a seemingly ordinary case of indigestion has escalated into a nightmare for Sadie Jones. She suffers from attacks of intense heartburn-like pain, violent hiccuping, and an inability to keep any food down. And now, during a drive to the country, Sadie has started spewing soap-like white foam.
It made me feel like we've got to find, we're gonna have to go to the doctor with this. We've got to find out what's going on.
I went into the doctor's office and I told him I can't eat anything. I'm losing weight. I've lost like 10 pounds just this week alone. And he said, kind of sounds like you have an eating disorder. I said, well, I'm not making myself throw up. It's just, it gets too full, or I feel like I'm too full and it just comes up. And he said, well, it's probably something psychological, and a lot of bulimics do that.
I was very angry. I tried to keep my composure as best I could. I told the doctor it is not bulimia. She wants to eat. She can't eat. She is not getting the food into her stomach. She is not doing this on purpose. I was insulted because the doctor's just not seeming to believe what's going on.
He said to come back in another 2 weeks to see him if it got any worse, and he also had told Les to watch me as well to see if it was an eating disorder or see what I was doing. I didn't know what to do. It was frustrating. I didn't know what else to tell him without it sounding like I was crazy.
Watching all of this take place with her and knowing that, there was nothing I could do to change it or make it better, that's pretty rough. It started getting to the point that I was constantly worried about whether she was okay.
Over the next 2 months, Sadie does the best she can to grin and bear the incapacitating symptoms.
I probably lost about 35 pounds by that point. I felt very, very weak. I would break out into tears in the slightest little thing.
You could tell she just didn't look as healthy as she did before. Her skin didn't have the glow that it used to have. She could run her fingers through her hair and she would have a wad of hair in her hand. Her hair was just starting to fall out.
I was a hermit stuck in the house, afraid to go anywhere. I couldn't even let my husband hold me at night.
At Thanksgiving, Sadie forces herself to make it to her family's festivities. But even that only makes her feel worse.
It was torture to smell the food that my mom had made that day. I probably hadn't eaten more than maybe 2 or 3 bites of food in about 6 or 7 days at that point. I went ahead and I made my whole plate like I normally do. I took a few bites of it and immediately had to go to the bathroom and throw it up.
Sitting across the table from somebody that you love, her stomach is growling and she's starving to death and she's so hungry. It was heartbreaking.
I just sat on the couch and started crying. Everyone just really, really noticed that day something was seriously wrong with me. My mom sat down on the couch beside me and Les. She said I looked like I was dead. She said I looked very sick and my skin was gray And she said that I have to get something done or I'm gonna die.
That was the major turning point because I wasn't gonna watch her do this anymore. I called and made an appointment with our family doctor. Either our doctor was gonna tell me what was wrong with her, or he was gonna send me to somebody that could.
Once Les got up and was telling him, "You're going to do something about this," the doctor said, "Okay, well, let me go make a few phone calls," and called one of the local gastroenterologists. He said that this doctor can see you today, and that's how I finally found Dr. Huggins.
When Sadie presented to the office, she had a variety of complaints, and there was a great deal of urgency, primarily because of her extreme weight loss. 30 pounds in a young individual oftentimes is a red flag that there's something serious going on.
He said that he thought that he might know what it was, and he had to make sure. I could tell by looking at his face that he didn't think that I was crazy.
We wanted to go and look into her esophagus to see what was going on. So we scheduled an endoscopy. Basically, an endoscopy consists of taking a small tube and placing it down through the esophagus into the stomach.
My first thought was, for the first time, somebody seems to know what's going on.
We noticed that her esophagus in particular seemed more dilated than the typical esophagus. In addition, we felt that there was a decrease in the overall activity typically seen.
When I woke up, Dr. Huggins was standing there with my husband, and he said that his suspicion was correct and that he knew exactly what it was that I had.
Over the last year, Sadie Jones has been enduring a humiliating and mysterious disorder that doesn't allow her to keep food or water down. Now, she's finally found a doctor who thinks he knows what's wrong with her.
For the first time in a long while, I felt like everything was going to be okay.
After assessing Sadie's symptoms of vomiting, reflux, and inability to swallow, in addition to the endoscopy findings, we were able to make a diagnosis of achalasia.
Achalasia is a rare disorder of the esophagus. In healthy individuals, the esophagus, which is made up of muscles, relaxes and contracts to move food and liquids into the stomach. But in patients like Sadie, the muscles are unable to do their job. As a result, anything that enters the esophagus cannot pass through to the stomach, producing a major blockage. Ultimately, the patient is forced to expel the content.
It felt wonderful to finally get a diagnosis of what this was, because it just took so much out of my life.
He pulled all of those symptoms that she's been having into one diagnosis, and they're all tied together.
Achalasia is progressive. You can have spasms of the esophagus in achalasia. These bouts of contraction can be so severe that she will have intense pain, very similar to what one experiences with a heart attack. These cycles of vomiting that Sadie was experiencing were an attempt to evacuate her esophagus. She would accumulate food in the esophagus until it reached a critical point, and at that point it would try to clear itself. Hiccups is a common manifestation of achalasia. The foam that Sadie experienced was produced by the salivary glands, and it was the body's attempt to respond to the irritation of the esophagus.
It was just really nice to be able to find out what was causing me all these problems. Finally, now it all makes sense.
Fortunately, Sadie was diagnosed in time, before the disorder got even worse.
If she hadn't been diagnosed, it probably would have led to a hospitalization, considering the amount of weight loss and the degree of dehydration which she had experienced.
My first question for Dr. Huggins was, how do we treat this now? Are we going to be able to cure it? He said that it's not curable, but he could try Botox injections.
So by injecting the medication into this area and thus achieving relaxation of this area, we remove the biggest problem from achalasia.
Once Dr. Huggins administers the injection, Sadie feels the effects almost immediately.
After we left the surgical center, we drove to the house and she ate and she's like, oh my God, I felt it going in my stomach. She didn't get sick.
It felt wonderful. I was just happy that, now I finally got my life back.
Following the injection of Botox, Sadie continued to improve drastically over a 3-week to 4-week period of time.
How long the Botox lasts varies from patient to patient, but Sadie will need treatments every 4 months or so to keep her symptoms in remission.
Over time, you'll have to go back and re-inject that tissue and achieving the same goal again and again.
While Sadie is thrilled to be eating and sleeping again, she and Les can't help but wonder why it took so long to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Over the last 14 years, I've seen approximately 20 to 24 cases of achalasia. The disease isn't very common.
It is such a rare thing. A family doctor is just not going to know what achalasia is right offhand. So I was lucky to find a gastroenterologist that knew what that was.
Today, Sadie is fully recovered, busy once again pursuing her studies to become a nurse and living her life to the fullest.
It's been about 2 years since the diagnosis, and the Botox seems to be doing a really good job right now, and I live my normal everyday life like I did before.
Sadie is my best friend. She has been since we first started dating, and I can't think of ever being without her.
I just think that, if you go to a doctor, and they just are not figuring out what's wrong with you, go see another doctor till someone sits down like Dr. Huggins did to me and actually listen to what you have to say.